All right, welcome to week 15, video number 1, where we're going to talk about 3D shapes. So we just finished our project where we did 2D shapes. We drew that backdrop for a pretend play or whatever. That was all 2D shapes, right? We found the area. Now we're going to start recovering some of our 3D shapes and learning a lot more about them. So in this video, we're just going to go back over some vocab words that you may or may not remember. This week, we don't really have a lot of math, more so like the concepts. And you'll see that as you watch the rest of the video. So first, let's talk about the different types of shapes we have. So if we look at these 3 shapes, these are all the same family of 3D shapes. All right, these 3D shapes, right, no matter how we turn them around, right, these are what we call prisms. So you might, right, that's the more technical word, you might say they're boxes or whatever, but these, our term for geometry for these types of 3D shapes is prism. What that means is they have 2 bases which are parallel, and they are the bases are congruent, and then we also have sides that wrap around the outside of the shape, which we call the lateral faces, and they are rectangles. So in a prism, we will always have rectangles as some of the sides, and then the bases can be whatever shape that you want, as long as it is a polygon, which means straight sides. So here, right, if we look at this shape, although it has triangles, it has rectangles as well. So that means those triangles, that's actually the base of this prism. So usually when we talk about base, we think top and bottom. So here is the prism standing up on its base. And we can see that all of the sides along, all of the faces along the outside are all rectangles. So let's go over some vocab words before we look at any other shape. But here is a prism, right? We already talked about base and base, right? 2 bases, top and bottom. And then we talked about the things on the outside. So no matter what it is, a 3D shape has faces. That's those sides of the shape, right? So here we have 5 faces in this prism. We have 2 bases, top and bottom, and the faces that are not bases are called lateral faces, right? That just means faces on the side, lateral. So that's for a prism. So a face is just the flat side of a 3D shape. On each face, we have edges, which are the lines of the shape, right? An edge is where 2 faces meet. So no matter how we look at it, right, if it's an edge, there's only 2 faces that meet there. The corner of the shape, this is called a vertex, and that's where 3 or more faces meet. So vertex, we usually call that just corner, right? Edge, we call that edge in real life. And then faces is our more geometry way to say side. And then base is the top and the bottom. And then lateral faces are the ones that are not bases. All right. I also threw out the word polyhedron, which means it is a 3D shape made out of only polygons. So here we have rectangles and triangles. Those are polygons, right? So we would say this is a triangular prism because its base is a triangle. So here we have another prism. Right here, the top and bottom are a square, or if we rotate it, now the top and bottom are a rectangle. This one, again, it has two faces. It has two bases, but it can change because we always have rectangles on the lateral sides. So these two things are very similar. They're both what we would call rectangular prisms because the bases are types of rectangles. They're not. A rectangle can be either like this, right? Or a special subset of rectangles can be squares. So we have a special word for this shape because it's all squares. We call this a cube. In real life, we probably would call this a box, but both of these are rectangular prisms, all right? And in this case, we could say here the bases are the squares, or if we rotate it, now the bases are these rectangles, the bottom and the top. Again, it has edges and vertices and faces. So here we have 6 faces, 12 edges, and 8 vertices. We're not going to focus on those numbers, but that could be something that we would have done if we were back in school. All right, so here are our prisms. The next type of common shape that we see is a pyramid. If we look at this pyramid versus this prism, if we look at their bottoms, they're both triangles. So here we have a triangular prism and a triangular pyramid. So the name of a shape is based on its base. All right. So here's a pyramid. What we notice is that it only has one base, right? It has this bottom. The top is no longer another face, it's just a vertex. So for that, we have one base in all pyramids and a vertex at the top. And then all of the lateral faces are triangles. So in a prism, all the lateral faces are rectangles. But in a pyramid, all the lateral faces are triangles. All right, but this is a triangular pyramid because the base is a triangle. What it can look like differently is if we have this other pyramid now, we no longer have the same base, right? If I look at the bottom of these pyramids, the bottom of this pyramid is a triangle, but the bottom of this is a square. So this would be a triangular pyramid. This would be a rectangular or square pyramid. But all of the faces, all the lateral faces are still triangles, and it still only has one vertex at the top, right? So pyramid, one base, and the lateral faces are triangles. And if we look at this other type of pyramid, right? Because again, base, vertex, and then triangles around the outside. We would classify this by looking at the bottom. That's a pentagon. So we can say this is a pentagonal pyramid, or a pyramid with a pentagon base, or a pentagon-based pyramid, right? So those are our polyhedrons, which means all of their sides are polygons. What other shapes do we have that don't have all polygons on the sides? And this is our first example. And I'm sorry, I tried making the best one I could. I wanted to keep the look of it consistent. This is a cylinder. What that means, it has those straight sides, it has 2 bases, and those bases are both the same congruent circle. All right. So cylinders kind of act like prisms because they have 2 bases. It just happens that those bases are circles, so that makes them a different shape, right? Remember, circles are not polygons, so we would not call this a polyhedron. This would be just a 3D shape. So we have a cylinder, which has 2 bases, versus a cone. A cone, which has 1 base and again a vertex at the top. So again, there's a difference between a shape with 2 bases, circle, that means cylinder, and a shape with 1 base, which is a circle, which means it's a cone. So cones act like pyramids, right? Because they all have 1 base. And then cylinders would go kind of in the same group as a prism because they have two bases. So we're going to see the similarities next week when we talk about volume and other things that we find out about 3D shapes. But I have one more thing to talk about before the video ends. And that is our last vocab word of the day, which is a 3D shape being right versus oblique. And that's spelled O-B-L-I-Q-U-E, oblique. And the difference between that, I'll actually show you a right and a oblique version of the same shape. Here we have, kind of hard to see, here we have two rectangular prisms, but one is right and the other one is oblique. And I'm sure you can guess which one's which, right? This prism has all right angles in the corner. That's one way to think about it. It also just looks right. This is what you would guess a prism would look like, right? This, on the other hand, has a slanted shape. Its angles are not right angles. And this one we would say is oblique, right? It still has a square as its base, but it's all slanted, right? And our technical word would be oblique. This is a right rectangular prism. This one is oblique rectangular prism. All right. Now let's look at an example of a pyramid, one that is right and one that is oblique. So here we have a square pyramid, all right? And then here we have another square pyramid. And again, it's kind of obvious which one is the weird one, right? Here we can see in the one with the black edges, this one is a right pyramid. And we can kind of see it's nice because all of the faces, all the lateral faces are all the same, right? But then here in the oblique pyramid, as we rotate the shape, we have different triangles, and they're not symmetrical triangles. They're all weird. They're pointed the different ways. We can also see that in this pyramid, although the bottom is a square, the vertex is like all the way off on one side. So although we can't really say, look at the edges, look at how they meet, are they at right angle or not, right? Because we call this right and we don't see right angles on the faces. But what we can say is that the vertex of the pyramid is directly above the center of the base. So if we look from the top down, that vertex would be the center, right, directly above the center of the square. If we looked at the right triangular pyramid, again, that vertex is directly above the center of the triangle. And with that right pentagonal pyramid, this vertex at the top was directly above the center of the shape. But with this pyramid, the vertex is all the way off in another place. It is not directly above the center. So this is oblique because it's all slanted, and this one is right because it looks perfectly made. All right. So right pyramid, oblique pyramid. All right, and then we have a last example of something oblique to just hammer down the idea. Here we have a prism, right? Here's one base, which is a pentagon. The other base, which is a pentagon. Both of those bases are pentagons. They're the same exact pentagon, same size, same everything. But when we look at the lateral faces, those lateral faces are now parallelograms. They are no longer rectangles. They no longer have those right angles. Those bases are not directly above each other. One's pushed to the side. It looks slanted. This would be an oblique pentagonal prism. All right. So those are just some of the vocab words I wanted to talk about today. To review that, all right, we said we have prisms, pyramids, cylinders, cones. Pyramids and pyramids are polyhedrons because they have polygons for faces. Cylinders and cones are non-polyhedrons because they have curves. We talked about the difference between a face an edge, and a vertex. And then the last thing, and I'm sure it's a shape that you are familiar with, and I cannot make it out of paper, would be a sphere, right, or a ball. But in geometry, we call it a sphere. So I could not make one out of paper, so I have to find a cat toy. So here is a sphere. All right, if better yet, if I had like a tennis ball or something like that, you could see there's not a straight face to it. There's no line. There's no edges. A sphere should have none of those. It is completely rounded. It's, again, another example of something that's not a polyhedron. We cannot do too much with it. You're going to see in the next video where we can say, here is a pyramid. How could we look at all of these 5 sides at once? And what did this piece of paper look like before I folded it up and made it into this pyramid? So you don't have any Khan Academy exercises from this video. Like you don't have to classify shapes. I might try to find one about right versus oblique. So maybe I will find one later. But you will have videos later on that will cover more complex ideas like nets, like cross sections, and like shapes we get by rotating something around an axis. All right, so good luck, and I look forward to seeing you in our morning support hours and our class time Q&A.